Hello and welcome back to the Movie Pope podcast to all the film faithful. And today we are going to be taking a look at Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. Now this is a continuation of Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1, which we did a review of last year. And initially when I saw the trailer, I was a bit confused because I was under the impression it would be Dead Reckoning Part 2, but it's the same, it's part of the same plot line. They just decided to switch the name up. And just from the title itself, it kind of makes me wonder if this might be the swan song to the adventures that Tom Cruise has been giving us for 20-something years. Now, Lee, you haven't watched this trailer at all, right?
No, I'm going in this totally blind. And kind of funny you mentioned the name, because right off the bat, I was like, wait a minute. What was the last one we watched? Like, what was the actual name for it? And it was like, oh, it is Dead Reckoning Part 1. So very bold choice to go ahead and, I guess, drop that, because I think you could have came up with kind of your own thing and then had the Final Reckoning, but maybe they weren't thinking about it at the time. But yeah, kind of a little bit of a weird naming scheme with the Final Reckoning. So I'll be very curious to see what we get in the last one, because I think overall we liked the previous one.
Yep.
But I know, unfortunately, box office wasn't very strong on it. So
and surprisingly, like the way they carried out the execution of that movie was pretty good. It's just, I guess, for whatever reason, there were just some elements that people really didn't, find too thrilling. For me, it was the death of Ilsa. I'm still traumatized by the whole thing. Not to mention, too, Tom Cruise deciding to ride his motorcycle off a mountain and somehow stick the landing is another.
There was a lot there for sure. My whole thing always goes back to you make your villain like a computer, and I mean, I know there's like a physical villain in the actual movies, but I feel like as an audience, like having to battle a computer just feels very weird.
But that would be but that is kind of funny. Just imagining Tom Cruise punching a motherboard.
Very true, very true. Ethan Hunt, just going in there punching CPUs. So
yep, after what 20 years of going after terrorists and rogue agents and all that stuff, his final villain is a CPU.
Mm-hmm.
But now I will admit I did cheat a little bit, but I'm not going to say anything until after we watch the trailer. But okay. I did hint earlier about what I think the title might be telling us. So
okay, well, we'll see if I'm on the same page with that then.
All right, let's dive in.
Our lives are not defined by any one action. Our lives are the sum of our choices.
I'm here, it's been a little while.
Everything you were, everything you've done has come to this.
Let's listen to that first one.
When the need for certainty is absolute and the odds are deemed impossible, the mission falls to him.
Should he choose to accept? For every life you tried to save, you gambled millions more. And now the fate of every living soul on Earth is your responsibility. That's the pattern.
I always like the Mission Impossible. It's all the globe plotting that they do, and they're definitely looks like they got to crank all the way up.
Sacrifice the ones you hold close.
He's got to be showing off there at his old age.
Been on the right side, brother. I have no regrets. Neither should you.
I need you to trust me. One last time.
I like hearing that trust. Interesting.
So obviously we saw a few drops there, a few nods to the previous Mission Impossible movies, and then obviously Ving Rhames saying that line, then Ethan Hunt saying his line, "And you do trust me one last time." I'm getting the impression that the Final Reckoning may be the final installment in the Mission Impossible movies, which isn't impossible to fathom, pun intended, because they are getting up there, and the franchise has been running since what, 97 or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
So it's not inconceivable to think that maybe it's time to just pack it in and kind of move on from there.
I'd be curious. I mean, we saw like a lot of that. Like we see him, like he was down there, on like the ocean floor, or we see him like on top of like a bed of ice there. So there definitely is some interesting things there. I don't think they have the guts to kill him off. But I would certainly agree with you. It definitely feels like having this 2-part film, I think, was very much meant to be the closing of Ethan Hunt, or at minimum the end of Tom Cruise's life as the character. I think box office for the last one probably did not make anybody want to do anything else with it. So I think the fact that this is where we're closing things off is maybe a positive sign. And I think it would be good to see that. I mean, we've seen this happen before, though, right? Like there's times where it's like, oh, this is the last one, right? Thinking back to, after just talking about Harrison Ford, right? Thinking about Indiana Jones, like, I mean, definitely had kind of his the end of that to me, and then you kind of bring him back for the Crystal Skull, and then like it's the while, and then you're like, oh, let's bring him back for something else. So you never know if anything will truly be the end. But I think that I do agree with you to that extent, that I feel like this is what they want Ethan Hunt's, I guess, career to be ending on, is with this film.
Well, you know what it is, because we did a trailer reaction to Ballerina a few weeks ago with Ana de Armas, and that's a spinoff of the John Wick franchise, and we've already said our piece on the whole thing, but remember when Ilsa was killed in Dead Reckoning, and we saw Haley Atwell's character kind of step in. Do you kind of think they're setting her up to be the next, I guess, lead in the Mission Impossible movies if they decide to go forward?
I would have to see what they want to do with her character in this one, but my short answer to that would be no. I just don't really see that happening. I still feel like it's hard for me to place why they felt the need to include a character. It felt very out of place before. Like I said, I personally don't see that happening. Maybe there's like a spinoff or something else that they want to do with it. But I think that it would be more standalone opposed to anything else. Yeah.
So she wouldn't necessarily take over the lead. She would just go off and do her own thing that's tied to the rest of the universe.
Yeah, if they were to do anything with it, then yeah, that's how I feel like it would happen. But also, too, I don't think it would ever want to have the longevity of what Tom Cruise has done with the Mission Impossible films. I think it would be very much like a standalone if they want to do it. But my gut is really it's not going to happen. So I would say this is absolute best case scenario, that for some reason Haley Atwell's character gets all this praise, and they decide they want to do something with it, or maybe they want to do like a little TV series about it. Either way, it will be short-lived, and I can't imagine it getting a whole lot of a crowd. So,
it's not completely inconceivable, because a lot of movie franchises are now dipping their toe into TV production.
Yes.
Obviously, we saw the Continental that came out last September that was supposed to be Winston's origin story. Gosh, I mean, the countless Marvel projects DC's doing it. The Godzilla franchise is doing it as well. So, I mean, honestly, I'm kind of surprised the Mission Impossible people haven't decided that they want to try something on their own yet.
Yeah, like you said, this might be the opening, right? This is where, if you're going to have this be the final thing, and I totally agree with you. I think this is the end for, Tom Cruise's Ethan Hunt. And however you want to look at that, that's fine. But yeah, I do agree with you. And maybe this is what they're, thinking is like, hey, this is our time to get in there. Maybe do something a little bit different than what we have right now. But I would say in almost all those situations, I don't want to say all of them, right? Because, you know, that's a little bit hyperbolic, but I think for the most part, those just really don't resonate with people. But the problem is it always has that like connection with a big IP. And that's what
Yeah.
unfortunately gets people into seats. It's like, oh, Mission Impossible. I have lots of great things about that. Remember, we was just dangling from those wires, and you have to be like, you know, that was like almost 30 years ago now, my guy. Like,
Yeah.
it's been a while for that. But unfortunately, like that's nostalgia gets people no matter what. So, yeah, but I just don't see. I don't have any faith in that happening. As far as anything being good, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if some greedy producers are like, "Oh, it's perfect time for us to, you know, have this other character in there, and we'll deal with her at that stage." So,
Well, what I also find kind of interesting too is that is the fact that from what we've seen in the trailer and from the little Easter eggs that they've laid for us. I mean, they are hinting at this kind of being the final installment, but obviously, movie studios will never let a franchise die completely, right? So who's to say that in a couple of months or even a year or so they come back and they say, well, Tom Cruise is going to be starring in another Mission Impossible movie. But then, having gone through this emotional journey of them having created where they make it out to be, well, after this, Ethan Hunt is going to ride off into the sunset, and we'll never see him, Luther, or Benji ever again, because they've defeated, the final enemy, which is this AI that has been programmed to, I guess, wipe out humanity, I guess Skynet or whatever. But then if they bring it back for another Mission Impossible, it's like, well, the emotional investment that you put into this final movie was basically misplaced, and you did it for nothing.
yes.
Here's another villain, and it's like, well, that's just a cheap shot right there, man. I mean, you've set this up for for us to think that this is going to be the end, only to come out and say, well, actually, it's not the end. We're just going to keep going on as usual, and then it turns you off, and then you alienate most of your audience as a result, right?
Yeah.
Because up until this point, all the Mission Impossible movies have kind of laid out the possibility that yes, there'll be more missions for Ethan and his team to take on. But what we've seen here, it's like, this is it. Like, where else can we go? We've hit the ceiling.
Yeah.
It's kind of like with Avengers Endgame and Infinity War. It's like, once you've reached that point, where else can the Avengers go? Right.
Exactly.
Now, unfortunately, Marvel has decided, well, there are many ways that they can go. They just didn't go in a very good direction. I'm a little worried that that's where the studios are going to take Mission Impossible.
Yeah,
right?
And it's unfortunate, but I mean, like unfortunately, the roadmap is out there for good or bad. I totally agree with you. Like, I think almost everyone will agree that while there might be some good standalone films, but anything like past Thanos has not really lived up to, I think, anyone's expectations. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, right? Like, when you set up something that's really good and people really enjoy it, the bar is just so high, there's just nothing you could do about it, right?
Yeah.
And that's not a problem, right? It's good that you had such a good product that people are memorable of that product. So like, it's good for that we're able to get something like that. But of course, it's always going to be having that comparison to the old one, and we're seeing that time and time again where people keep trying to like remake and rehash and bring people back in. And I think audiences somewhat are still paying attention to it just because of where it's coming from. But with that being said, I feel like the more we see these products fail time and time again, the less likely we are to see it happening. And I think that's probably for the best, because I feel like the product from the beginning has been very underwhelming, and that's putting it nicely for a lot.
Well, it also says a lot about the state of the film industry right now. Because,
absolutely.
Because I mean, we talk about superhero fatigue. Let's not forget another disease, franchise fatigue.
Yep.
Because for the past 10 to 15 years, we've been introduced to numerous franchises that have come and gone. I mean, the Dark Universe was supposed to be like the monsters version of the MCU, and that failed spectacularly. And then we've got the Conjuring, and then we've got the Monsterverse with Godzilla and King Kong. And and then not to mention James Gunn is trying to revive DC for the third or fourth time.
Mhm.
It kind of makes you wonder at what point do they decide, we can't keep doing this, it's unsustainable. Because I think the beauty here is that if it goes away, it gives filmmakers more of an opportunity to tell standalone stories.
Absolutely.
Good examples would be The Leftovers, which we or was it The Leftovers or The Holdovers, with Paul Giamatti, because that was a really, really good movie and we both enjoyed that.
Yeah.
And then
I mean, there's loads of these. Like, I mean, think about American Fiction, right? Absolutely love that.
absolutely. And then Oppenheimer too with Christopher Nolan. That was
Yeah, and
was a
I mean,
wonderful
there
story.
are, yeah, and I think the big thing is like if the product is good, people will see it regardless, right? Like one of my absolute favorite films over the past few years is still a superhero film, and it's the Miles Morales Spider-Man films. I absolutely love those films. They're fantastic, and even though I absolutely am tired of seeing superhero stuff, that is able to do something new and unique that gets me engaged with it, right? And that makes me want to watch it. The problem is like they keep trying to retread everything, and that causes a bigger issue because people don't want to see that, right? People don't want to think about like, oh, Captain America's gone. Now we're trying to replace it with that with Anthony Mackie, right? Or we don't want to see, we have so many fond memories of Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man. Now we want to have Ironheart kind of replace it. Like it just rubs a lot of people the wrong way.
Well, not to mention too, not even that, but bring back the same actor to play a different role. It can, in a way, it kind of feels like a cheap move. Also,
yes, there's a lot of very questionable things out there. But really, at the end of the day, it all comes down to us as the audience not going to go see the product. If people continue to go watch it for whatever reason, they'll continue to push it out. And it's just, I think this is where things kind of get frustrating for me, at least, is just like, we know for the most part that these things are not very good, right? I mean, we've seen flop after flop. Now it looks like something like Blade, right, is totally going to be upturned because they can't seem to figure anything out with it. It's like at a certain stage, you just got to not watch it, right? Like you have to vote with your wallets, and unfortunately, people continue to vote for it, and that's what the issue is. You keep wanting to back for less desirable stuff.
I mean, I will admit I'm as guilty and I'm complicit as the rest of us because
damn it, Luca.
I mean, it gives us fodder to talk about for the.
I know. I mean, we're the same, right? Like, I'm not trying to take the high road on that. I'm very much in that too.
But at the same time, but at the same time, it's like art that's so bad it's compelling. Like you can, it's kind of like a car accident. Like as terrible as it is, you can't just look away. Like you have to look at it.
Yeah, I feel like people like start to like almost hate watch stuff, right? So, think back to something like Velma, the TV series, right?
Yeah.
I don't think anyone was going into that like, oh, this is like. I mean, I don't remember. I cannot think of too much of anything positive that came out of that, except for maybe some of the animation was good, but universally hated. But guess what? Ends up getting a second season. Why? Couldn't tell you, but I think that goes to the fact that sometimes like just having the IP and just like having something of so poor quality gets people to talk and watch it, regardless of its quality. So it's inevitable, right? Things will happen one way or another. There's not much control over it, but yeah, I hope that we start seeing more original ideas. Don't want to move too far from our subject, but yeah. I guess they want to do with Mission Impossible, swinging the conversation back to that.
So for this particular movie, do you think this might be something that might intrigue you enough to go see in theaters, or
for sure? Yeah, I mean, I think regardless of how I feel about the franchise's future, what it has, the Mission Impossible series for the most part to me has been really strong. I think you kind of have like the original trio, right, that came out. The first one was obviously the best one to be by far. I didn't care as much for the second and third one. Not that they were bad, but kind of, I think not maybe of the same quality as the original one. But I think the newer ones in particular that kind of happened have been good enough. And certainly like having something be the second part of something that we already watched, it being kind of to your point, right? Getting some vibes that, this is the Ethan Hunt's last type of mission idea. I think that absolutely gets me enough of an interest to go and see it. So it definitely has me reeled in for a lot of reasons.
In spite of yourself, right?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I think the first one, the first one, I still enjoyed it for the most part. I think that, I have my own qualms against it. But I think that it did enough for me to want to see how it was going to end. So I do, like I said, have some interest in it. And like I said, I like Tom Cruise. I like the Ethan Hunt. I like the franchise. I don't think it's gotten to the stage that it's just been so poorly done that I cannot go out and enjoy it some more. So I would be curious to see the final hurrah, so to say.
All right. Well, let us know down in the comments below what you think of Mission Impossible Final Reckoning. Are you excited to see it? Do you really think this might be Ethan Hunt's swan song, or do you think they've got more in the chamber? Go ahead and let us know down in the comments below. And as always, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next one.